Welcome to NeLI Pod, the official podcast of the National eDiscovery Leadership Institute. Hi, I'm Daniel Gold, your co-host and navigator through the evolving landscape of eDiscovery.
And my name is Brandon Mack. I'm the co-host of our podcast. Our guests, from judges to eDiscovery professionals, share insights that cater to all experience levels.
Whether you're looking for a broad overview or in-depth technical analysis, this podcast is your gateway to understanding and implementing effective eDiscovery practices.
It's important to note the opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individual guests and the host, and do not necessarily represent the views of their respective employers.
We're here because of our passion for eDiscovery and our commitment to providing free, accessible educational content to legal professionals everywhere. And welcome back to another episode of NeLI Pod, the official podcast of the National eDiscovery Leadership Institute, where we bring together the voices that are truly shaping the future of legal practice, legal education, and the profession at large. And today is really exactly that. We are privileged and we are honored to have the Dean of the University of Missouri, Kansas City Law School, Dean Lou Mulligan, to join us here on the program. One of the reasons why that's so special to us is because the University of Missouri Kansas City Law School has been a strong supporter and partner of the National eDiscovery Leadership Institute, NeLI, since its inception. And we are so happy and we're so honored to have that association, to have that partnership. And Dean Mulligan, it is so great to have you on the program. Welcome to the NeLI Pod.
Well, Daniel, Brandon, thank you both for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. And anytime we can deepen our relationship with NeLI and have a chance to visit with the best practitioners in the United States, that's a thing we want to do here at UMKC Law.
Well, that's fantastic. And what a great segue to our opener. Dean Mulligan, you have a very impressive background. And you and I, we were talking before the show started. And often what I like to do is to brag a little bit about our guests that are on the show. It was very difficult, when we've had some judges on the show to, list all of their case law that they've decided. So it's easier for them to talk about it. And so likewise, it's really important, Dean, to all of our listeners to have some sort of context, a frame of reference as to what your background is like and what led you to the Dean of the Law School. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about that background of yours?
I'd be happy to. I'm the product of actual Haight-Ashbury hippies out in San Francisco, and my proper first name is Lumen, meaning Latin for light. So I eventually had to cut my hair and go to law school to rebel, becoming a great disappointment to my parents later on. But by the time I was 4 or 5, I grew up in the Kansas City area on either side of the state line. My dad was a laborer at the water department, and my mom, while she had myself and my brother, put herself through nursing school and became a registered nurse and became a nurse educator over time. But we didn't have a lot when I was growing up, and we moved house a couple of times at midnight, and I know what that means now that we were skipping out on rent. But for me, that sticks in my mind, both the example of my mom advancing herself with a higher education degree, and then myself being able to go to public university and public law school. I have 2 daughters who've never moved house at midnight, and that power, that being able to do that is really what we're all about here at UMKC Law School. I'll talk a bit about myself in a second, but what we really are about are changing the lives of our students, changing the lives of their families, changing communities through that power of public education. I was privileged to go to University of Kansas to earn my bachelor's degree. I have a master's degree in philosophy from University of Colorado and my JD from University of Michigan. I began my career clerking for then Chief Judge Tanel Taha, the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, and was a litigation associate at Polsinelli. I had my own law firm for a while called Stillwell and Mulligan. We were representing nonprofit organizations. And then somewhat accidentally fell into teaching at the business school back up at the University of Michigan. Then was at the Law College at Michigan State for a number of years. 14 years at University of Kansas at the College of Law, and then as a vice provost for the whole university. And 3 years ago, UMKC calls, "Hey, have you thought about being the law dean in your hometown?" I said, "Well, that sounds pretty cool." And had that opportunity to come over here. Was able to do a lot of, when I was still a professor, not so much an administrator, did a lot of consulting work overtime on large MDLs here in Kansas City, briefed several United States Supreme Court cases, set the CGA appellate panel for a number of years, and was Kansas Governor Laura Kelly's chief COVID litigator.
So just a couple of things you've done in your past there, Dean Mulligan. Yeah, a couple of things. And obviously you've got a fan with Brandon since you both share an alma mater there for sure. It,
Absolutely.
it's there's an interesting through line in a lot of what you said, right? And a lot of goes back to your early childhood days and really being able to, see the example that your parents said of them. And you were talking about your mother just a moment ago. And I think that that's very interesting as you started progressing through your career and through the education and a lot of giving back. And I often feel, and you tell me if this sounds right to you, I often feel that education is very much about giving back and that you take your years of knowledge, skill, and expertise and you do something with it that is far more powerful than sometimes just being a practitioner from a day-to-day perspective, because you are in fact helping others become better versions of themselves with education. Is that right?
Whether educators are more powerful than our practitioners who are solving clients' existential problems, whether it's in the criminal justice system or preserving a business or working on a family law issue, I don't know with one's greater than the other, but in terms of being an educator, exactly so. If you're doing it at its highest level, it's exponential. I have 75 folks in a classroom at a time. You're impacting those folks who are going to go on to do incredible things. And then next semester, there's two more rooms of 75 people in them. And we're building skills and we're thinking more deeply. We're building discernment. We're creating that foundation of professionalism and ethics. And those folks are going to go out into the world. So you do have that multiplier impact there. We have four retirements here this year at UMKC Law School, folks who've been doing this for decades. And we were counting up the number of students. And when you start getting into the thousands, that exponential impact of what that person's had, the lives that he or she has touched, it's a privilege to do this job. It really is.
Yeah. And you've been doing it for quite a while, and you've done it in a number of different forums. We've talked about some of the different schools where you've taught, and now you're in more of an administrative role. There's been a lot of change in the practice of law over the course of your career as an educator. One of the things that we focus here on NeLI Pod is it's a podcast about eDiscovery. So specifically honing in on eDiscovery, it's one of the biggest changes that we've seen in the law in the last 10, 15, 20 years, seeing the changes around the rules, seeing the changes in technology that support the practice of litigation and the use of all this data in litigation and eDiscovery. When you think specifically about eDiscovery and the way it's taught and how much it's covered in law schools, what do you think of the sort of the current approach to eDiscovery as a topic in law schools in general and of course specifically at UMKC?
Well, Brandon, thank you for that question. As a Civ Pro geek myself, these are near and dear to my heart. Let me start with one's always a little scared to talk about legal education generally because that's a broad landscape of lots of different things. But I would say at the top of the mountain level, looking at all 200 law schools in the United States, eDiscovery education would be probably uneven and evolving. You're going to have some schools that have really leaned into that, especially heavily, going to the sixth and the seventh course and all that type of thing, to other schools that maybe don't even have an opportunity to engage in that at all. And you would have that full spectrum. But I would also say that I'm seeing in the stronger schools, eDiscovery moving from specialty to more core. Not a required class, but part of that core litigation curriculum. In the same way that if a young person says, "I'm thinking about being a litigator," and well, evidence. Let's get in whatever your school's version of Civ Pro 2 is called. Are you in Fed courts? Are you in the trial advocacy progression? Are we going to get you into a live client clinic? All those types of things. And you're seeing the strongest schools and have an eDiscovery class or classes, or it's embedded in a clinic, or it's a simulation. Some way of engaging with those folks. It's that core civil litigation track. And you're definitely seeing that here at UMKC. For the longest time, we've had an eDiscovery class where people are engaging in requests and responses and that type of thing. In the last number of years, we've been able to engage a bit more even on the using some tech tool sides. How would we do this? Can we have a model opportunity to visit with a vendor? What are the types of things you might be able to do in-house if you're at a smaller shop and trying to save a little dollars? Um, that sort of thing. So I see it definitely becoming a core piece for that person who knows he or she's going into civil litigation.
I, I love your answer. I want to dig a little bit deeper into that, if that's all right, Dean. So I recall there was a movie and then a TV series called The Paper Chase.
Yeah.
I think it was in the late 70s, right? Or early 80s. And the professor said to all of the 1L students walking in, you come in, your brain is like mush, and you leave thinking like a lawyer, right? And I remember that. And I think I was a graduate of law school in 2002, before eDiscovery was, really eDiscovery. And it's interesting because when I think about the different tracks or different ways that you started laying out for from an educational perspective for a law student, it is you have to learn the basics of the law. You have to learn how to think like a lawyer. You have to learn how to write like a lawyer. There's this whole analytical aspect of it. So if you come in with like a liberal arts degree, you may not be ready as much as somebody came in as a poli-sci major, right, et cetera. So there's things to learn, right? There's things
Yeah.
to learn. At least in a while, I'll speak for myself. At least for me, right, as a liberal arts major walking in the door of law school, and over the years, as Brandon has said, like the notion of e-discovery has been around, so really, at least codified as early as 2006. We started talking about it, and then codified again in 2015. And when you talk about this scattered nature by which we see the topic of electronic discovery being taught, I, I'm very curious about it because it would almost seem like talking about e-discovery in the business of law, not just the practice and how to think like a lawyer, should be commonplace by now, especially in the model rules of professional responsibility. We harp on this over and over and over again, and I know I do. I know Brandon does as well in CLEs, is that we talk about that we have to be competent, all right, under Rule 1, and to understand what it means to be competent. Comment 8 has been there since 2012 to say that we have to understand the benefits and risks of relevant technology. And now I know California is thinking about adding in more comments to talk specifically about AI. So all of that lead in to ask the question of like, why isn't it just commonplace curriculum since 2006, or at least since 2015, to have e-discovery nationally be taught? I mean, kudos to UMKC, obviously.
I'm again, I'm not empowered to speak on behalf of my 199 other law dean colleagues.
Sure, sure,
But what
sure.
but what I can say is I might parse some of those pieces out, Daniel. Talking about law as a business, technical competency, and e-discovery is one particular aspect of those. I agree, almost every law school in the country is doing some way of engagement. What is law as a business? And indeed, and what it means to be a professional. There's a new ABA standard or newish about professional identity formation. And you're absolutely right on rules of professional responsibility on having technical competence, right? And there's a new ABA formal opinion 512, addressing AI competence in particular. Uh, Bear in mind, though, we've known since there's these big reports on legal education, and one of the most famous of those is this called the McCrate report, and that's getting to be 25 years old or almost 30 years old now. And even then, we knew at that time that the overwhelming majority of students who graduate law school do not go into litigation of any kind, criminal or civil. And that only grows every year. We also know in the practice that people who go into litigation leave it into a regulatory or a transactional or an in-house position. So, and then if you carve out the number of folks who are going to go into a criminal practice, which is usually not like the number of folks from any law school that are going to go into a civil practice, and that's going to vary from law school to law school. But to talk about mine, that's less than 1 in 5. So when we think about being competent in technology, we think of it and not in terms of particular tools for and say that everyone is gonna we're gonna pretend that 80% of these students are going to be civil litigators when they're not, right? We talk about how are we providing tools and pathways and good advising so that folks who are on a litigation track are getting those great skills,
Mhm.
and that folks who are going to go on a transactional track are introduced to spellbook or these types of things. That folks who are going to go into a regulatory space have those tools. So to have everyone go to an area of law that statistically they're not going to practice, they're vocalizing they're not going to practice, it isn't helpful and tends to have the opposite effect of turning people off and making them jump through hoops that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
Right? When we should be that person who wants to be a transactional attorney, or that person who's going to be a public defender, or that person who's going to do trust and estate work, and so on and so on, is getting an introduction to the technology that she's going to be working with. So I hope that answers the question that, the eDiscovery folks in our world are like, well, that's the whole game, but we're not every lawyer, right? And I think all of our good law schools are all saying how are we providing that fundamental intellectual foundation, but then how are we advising and tracking our students so they're hitting their goals and their dreams? This person wants to be a legislative aide coming out of school, and that person, and so on and so on and so on. So it's a bit more multivarious than assuming that e-discovery is the task that all folks are going to be engaged in their career.
That is a great answer, and it did answer all the questions I had coming out of what Daniel was saying. And I think you're 100% right. I eat, sleep, and breathe eDiscovery. That's what my career is. So I sometimes forget how small of a wedge in the entire world of law what it is that I do might be. So it's still as ubiquitous as it is for those who do litigate. It's still a little bit niche when you think of the practice of law in general. But something else that Daniel said in his question, or another topic that he brought up in his question, which I think is a little bit more ubiquitous nowadays, is the use of AI. So AI, and we think of all the time, Daniel and I in our lives, how AI applies to e-discovery. But the reality is, the way we're seeing LLMs and the use of generative AI grow across all industries, and it's a daily conversation for almost everybody everywhere to bring it up somehow, or at least it seems that way.
Right.
It's got to be working its way into law school curriculums, into even into the rules of the law school as to how it can be used in getting your work done as a student from day to day. So I'm really curious what you've seen and how you've seen it develop as an educator and an administrator, the use of and the education around AI for these, blossoming lawyers.
Absolutely. And we could talk about AI forever. And
Yeah.
Brandon, I totally agree with you that that is one of those more foundational tools. We can dig even a little deeper when we talk about AI education here at UMKC. We're
Mhm.
trying to not focus on what we would call the technical term, as I understand, sort of the wrappers of are we going to talk about Harvey or whatever, but rather the underlying
Yeah.
formatting and technology there that someone can be educated about so that whatever new skin is placed on top of that over time, that person has that slightly deeper knowledge, not a computer scientist knowledge, but a deeper
Right.
to engage in that. Let me start at the broader national level, and then we can talk a bit more about what we're doing here at my school. But at the national level, you're seeing lots of different movements. Of course, courses dedicated to AI. You're seeing credentialing and pathway programs around AI. You're seeing required AI competency tests at some schools. You're seeing student AI access initiatives because there's an equity piece, right? Do my wealthier students have it already, and my folks who don't quite have those access? You're seeing experimentation and applied AI. You're seeing faculty scholarship around AI. You're seeing public programming and tools around AI coming into the marketplace, and you're seeing infrastructure and policy being developed. So you're seeing like across every node, not just in the even the educational mission, you're seeing different pieces of different schools at different places on that sort of AI journey, if you like. And with different schools with different missions leading into that in different ways. I can talk a bit about UMKC, which I know obviously a bit more about. We have 28 different courses here at UMKC Law that are either fully 100% about AI or have a meaningful component of AI in it. You can't take a copyright class now
Yeah.
without having a meaningful unit on AI. So even those things you would think it's not a tech course, it's impacting everything. We do stuff on cybersecurity and related fields, and of course now AI is a big piece of those courses. Our experiential programs are rolling in AI for our real clients. So we're using spellbook licenses in our business law clinic. How are we, introducing folks to those types of tools? Our friends in the family law clinic and IP clinic are looking at how do we integrate? There are still maybe a step or two. I'm behind on integrating that into their clinical experience, but we're working there
Mhm.
on that piece of it. You'll see us hiring coming in this fall. We have soon to be Professor Bao Chua, who's a former senior software engineer at Lyft, about 10 years of experience there before going back to Harvard Law School and practicing and having a federal circuit court clerkship. He's going to come in, and his upper division classes are all going to be in the sort of law and tech and AI space. So we're adding in personnel here at UMKC Law around that. We already have a micro credentialing program. We allow students to do X number of classes, which would include some of our mini term classes where you build your own LLM and that type of thing and get a credential. Um, those things are challenging for universities who are not known for nimbleness and speed.
Yeah.
To build a curriculum in this evolving environment is a challenge. Like for me to even change one credit hour on something, I have to get my faculty approval, the University of Missouri system has to approve it. This thing called the Higher Learning Commission has to approve it. Then the Missouri Department of Higher Education has to approve it, and then I have to slaughter 18 goats and give up one of my children. So that it's that so to move at the speed of the technology it presents problems. That's part of my job to navigate. But so how are we trying to remain nimble in that space? A couple of the things I'd like to talk about here at UMKC Law. We have NeLI partners with our continuing legal education unit here. Last year, we more than doubled our AI related programming there. We're moving towards having a more AI suite of programs there for the practicing bar that one might think about having a year-long curriculum that someone engages in AI programming. We're looking at AI weekends where you might go away, as part of a CLE experience and really have a deep dive for that for as folks are getting retooled in that space. We recently just passed last week at our faculty meeting the promise to all of our students, we will give a legal AI tool to all of our students. We just got that passed in the faculty. What tool that's going to be, we'll tune in. But that for us became an equity piece because our folks who have some more resources were already buying their commercial Claude or whatever, and we wanted to make sure that we're putting everybody in the same footing. That doesn't mean that a faculty member has to allow it in her class. It just means that everyone has access to that tool as part of the same way you have a Westlaw password as a law student.
Yeah.
You'll have that access to that tool. Um, and we, through our innovation center, are producing software tools to attack social justice problems right now. So, for example, on our law school is right here on the state line between Kansas and Missouri. On the Kansas side, we created an AI tool that's working with one of the Kansas courts in what's called Johnson County, Kansas, on to help with eviction pro se filings. And then we developed that software key to Kansas statutory law that helps people to produce those filings there. It's making a big difference. We have a tool on the Missouri side. We're having some issues with unauthorized practice of law here, and those are understandable, but that works with expungement. And how are we allowing folks who need to proceed pro se to use some of those tools to help them generate pro se petitions? So you're seeing our school courses, pathways and certificate programs, resources, training for our faculty, experiential education, creating new tools to meet the marketplace, continuing legal education. We're hitting all of those spaces. So AI is everywhere.
I think it's admirable, and I think it's fantastic how much you have integrated, like you said, each one of those different nodes. that you're leveraging AI, all these various different ways. I have a related question to that. So that made me think about something else. There's an interesting study that now it wasn't peer reviewed, but MIT came out with this interesting study about how, and you may have seen it, about how they took a group of participants and they split them up. And one group of participants, they were told they had to basically come up with a position on a paper and write an essay, and they had just basically, search engine and go write it. And the other group had ChatGPT. And then the group that had ChatGPT obviously finished much, much faster, right? Speed to the deliverable was right there. The other group was, well, they took a whole lot longer. But what's interesting is that the group that utilized ChatGPT, that group was called to defend basically their positioning and their argument, they couldn't remember anything, right? And the ones that utilized Google, they obviously did. And it made me think about law school. And Brandon has heard this story so many times, and I apologize, Brandon, you have to hear it yet again. But when I was a young buck as a lawyer practicing, I was asking my partners to please purchase Lexis or Westlaw or whatever it was, right? Some online research tool, because all we had next to us was our own in-house library, right? We actually physically had the books, right? For those of everyone, including yourself, Dean Mulligan, that can remember, we all had books in our law offices.
Those are those broken iPads that people have in the library.
Those,
Yeah, I've heard of those.
yeah, that's funny. And so I finally convinced the partners to get online research database tool, right? And so then one day my partner comes in and says to me, Daniel, go use this new fandangled thing that you made us buy and find this issue of law. And I'm going to go next door to the library and I'm going to find the same issue and let's see who wins. So he comes in, 5 minutes later and he throws the book down on my desk and he's like, there, I found it. He's like, was that tool worth it? And what's interesting is that obviously he knew what he's looking for and he cheated. I'm sure he did all these years later. But what's interesting to me is this, is that there is some sort of cognitive mechanism that we learned in our brains, no differently than what we learned when we had maps and we were learning how to get from Kansas City back to San Francisco, right? We utilized a map and we highlighted the path. And when we wanted to find an issue of law, we would go into the CFR, all right, and we would find, what is the statute? What are we looking for? And then we go find the case law and we look through the slip sheets. And there's this whole, I'm not saying it was better, right? I think a calculator is better than an abacus, but there was this whole like cognitive functioning skill that was involved that we learned as young lawyers. And now it's so darn convincing when we ask ChatGPT or Claude. And I'm wondering what the law school is doing around that piece of it of like how do we make up for that I don't know, you want to call it a lost art, Dean, something, right, where we used to be able to really truly just like flip the pages and find something, and now it's like we ask either an LLM or some sort of chatbot and it gives us the answers, but then we have to be super careful that the answers that are giving us, as convincing as it looks, it's may not be right because it may have hallucinated, etc. How's the law school working with that?
We're deeply leaning into that as a question of education and how do you use this tool. So, you know, you can open a beer bottle with the screwdriver, but that's not what a screwdriver is for, right? And but and it might maybe you don't hurt yourself and maybe you don't blow up all the beer, but better to use a bottle opener. And something of the same thing is happening here. If your legal AI gives you an answer and you don't read the statute and you don't read the relevant cases, you don't hit the Shepherdize button yourself, you don't read, that particular learned treatise on the area, right? You've used the tool inappropriately, right? So it's a great way to speed up research. But if you go like, oh, it did it, and I have no duty to look at any of these things, to learn anything about it, to make sure it applied to the facts of my case, that when I'm reading this, didn't go like, oh, I never knew there was sub issue 3 because I didn't know that and didn't, right? So AI shouldn't be taking any of those things away from you. And I think that's where people are getting in professional responsibility trouble and having those other things where you say, well, I don't have to do anything else. That's error. Well, can this be a great tool? Can it give you a nice first draft? But do you still need to go read those primary source materials? I mean, if you value your license, if you want to make sure you're not hurting our fellow citizens who are your clients, if you want to make sure that you're upholding your duty to be informed and to duties of candor and other things to the court, you better. So I think that but that's about education in the same sort of way that the iPhone comes out in 2007, and it's just now we're kind of figuring out what are parenting standards. When do you give this to them? Do they have them in school? Does that work? Does it not work? This pace of technology is a little bit faster than the sociology
Yeah.
that surrounds all those things. But that's a place where I think law schools can really step up and be leaders, not only in what we're doing in the classroom, but in CLE and other things. Like, how do you use it, 15-year attorney? Claude or Harvey is not a 2-year associate. And so I think that's an education process. Is the short answer for how we attack that. I think that will have impacts for lots of things though. So maybe the billable hour is not really gonna remain king. Maybe we start billing out on the transactional side, billing out projects, right? And we don't want to have that disincentive from clients. And like, well, you went and looked up all the things that Claude gave you. Well, what were you billing me for that?
Yeah.
As opposed to this particular M&A project costs, Y dollars. I'm going to do a heck of a job. I'm going to do a great job because I want repeat business and I want to be ethical and I want to make sure I've covered all my bases. And I want to be efficient as well. So I'm already seeing, lots of law firms talking about what does this mean for pricing? What does this mean for business models? What does it mean internally for how we even work comp in-house?
Mhm.
If it's not going to be this, every associate needs to hit 1850 hours, and that's how we need to. So it's really changing that whole broader structure. But to me, anyways, I think that's the healthier way to think about it. And if I could add one last gloss on your question, for me, it's really important when we think about AI to not only think about it as an efficiency tool that makes things faster, but as a market expansion tool. So depending on which study you read, 80 to 90% of legal need in the United States is unmet because folks can't afford a lawyer. Now, if we have AI that's not just making stuff more efficient for that 15 to 10% who can already afford lawyers, and that's great, but actually digs into that access to justice problem, making it a little easier to get. Let's just take divorces. I happen to sit on the Civil Rules Advisory Committee in the state of Kansas. In the state of Kansas, 93% of all divorces have at least one unrepresented party, and nearly 80% have both parties unrepresented. So, if we could have some tools that could help people access an attorney in even an uncontested divorce, because those things were a little more attainable. There's a lot more deeper into that. We go a lot deeper into that market, and I think that has impacts for rule of law. I think it has impacts for people's faith in institutions. I think it would have an impact in the health of our democracy. So I think that we need to think both and. I know a lot of us, especially who are running law firms, are like, well, how am I gonna get this cheaper? How can I have the cost of this M&A transaction?
Yeah.
But I would like us also to think, how do we provide legal services to a broader and meaningful segment of our fellow citizens who have been shut out by price? Because now we have an opportunity for, probably not everybody, but we have an opportunity to get a little bit deeper. That person who's setting up his or her own little business maybe can get some actual professional legal help on how am I going to structure it, or can get some legal advice on how do I properly and ethically employ people, and all those kinds of things that startup restaurants say maybe can't do,
Yeah.
but maybe we can now. So I want to continue to insist that we think about both, and that we're broadening that access to rule of law. As again, I think that's going to be healthy for our nation in a lot of different ways.
I mean, that's a great perspective on things, and it's another illustration of how we started out this conversation, or at least that last question that was asked, talking about AI and AI integration into legal education, and now we're talking about some of the ripple effects of AI's presence in the legal profession in general, how many changes that can make. From your position as an educator, and you're looking at these young students who are going to be attorneys in 2, 3 years, you're seeing all these changes that could be happening to the profession. What are the things about what you see outside the halls of education, out where lawyers are practicing, that make you most excited for your students who are there now? Like, oh, I can't believe they're going to have the opportunity to do X in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. There's so many things that I'm excited about my students for, and a couple of broad themes in that space. I think our profession is becoming more interdisciplinary. Just this conversation that we're having here,
Mhm.
it is one that's bounding upon different things, and the liberal arts and computer science, business savvy, but it's becoming more interdisciplinary, more entrepreneurial, and I think therefore more impactful as a broad theme. I also see as a broad theme, our students now are much more mission driven than, and that's true not just with law students, but all of the students that are going to college right now, really looking for a career paths that align with mission for them. You're seeing majority women graduating out of law schools nationally since 2016. Each year's national graduating class has been majority women, and I know we're still having challenges with those women advancing through, at least on the private practice side, but that's going to erode away, I'm confident. And we're gonna have more women in leadership, and that's going to have impacts that are various and fecund. We're seeing our workforce get more diverse, and which will have impacts which will be various and fecund. And we're seeing, I think, an interesting space where sometimes the smaller law firms are now, because of different AI tools or e-discovery vendors or other things, that are able to compete for business and clients that used to be only the big law folks could be in. Well, and that's just good for a market.
Yeah.
When you can enter into these different spaces, and a shop of 8 people can take on a wrongful death suit for the local utility, when before that had to be a 300-person law firm. Well, that's just a much more dynamic and engaging atmosphere that empowers folks to be their own boss, have their name on the door. So it's a very impactful time, so you can really, I think my grads are going to be able to craft practice as they want it, more than maybe folks in the past could. I think that's exciting. I think they're gonna be more fluid between sectors. We're already seeing that. Someone goes into the prosecution side for 8 years, jumps over to a plaintiff side practice, then maybe ends her career as an executive director of a nonprofit organization. And we're that as numbers is becoming more prevalent, and I think that's exciting. Um, and I guess I would end. I think as our practice has more AI infusion, I think we're really going to be looking to lawyers to bring judgment, discernment, experience, because I will get my list of cases like that. But what my counsel brings is discernment, judgment, professionalism, compassion, empathy. And so those are all the things that, and I'm so excited about, about the future generation of lawyers. So I could answer, Brandon, your question for longer than you would like me to, but there's just so much upside going on right now.
And there's so much good in what you just said.
Yeah.
There are these themes that I've gotten, that we've gotten throughout this episode so far that I just think is so interesting. I mean, your passion for equity of the law and for the rule of law, it is contagious. And I love that because first of all, you taught me something I didn't know. Brandon, I don't know if you know, our listeners do this, about how more women are graduating from law school than men are since 2016. I had no idea, and I think that's phenomenal. Um, and you're right, that will have an impact as far as, in a very positive way from a leadership and a private sector perspective, in other places as well. But this whole idea of just, we talk a lot about AI, but one of the things that I hear you saying that I don't hear this perspective from others as well is that AI is essentially the greatest equalizer for equity of the law. in some of the things you were talking about that UMKC Law School is working on for as far as like the expungement, the divorces, other areas in which you're providing fairness and you're teaching that to the students. And so when you say, I'm more excited about this class of graduates than other, this is certainly not a commercial for UMKC Law School, but I say this with authenticity when I say this, is that you are teaching the students more than the law. And something that AI cannot replicate, as far as I know, and at least as of right now, are three things that you mentioned before: discernment, compassion, and empathy.
Yeah.
And I think you nailed it.
Well, I think that's important, and I'm happy for this to be an advertisement for UMKC Law School. Please come. It's a wonderful community, and we would love to have you here. But in fairness to our other law schools, I mean, our other law schools in the United States are doing this work too, 100%, and they're leaning into that. And I think all of us are saying we need to give people these technical tools, but we don't need our lawyers to be, profit maximization automatons. We need those folks to bring ethics and judgment, and wherever that comes from for that person. This person's maybe a humanist. This person's deeply, in the Christian tradition. This person comes at it from a different point of view, but they're going to bring those values, because at the end of the day, law is a human profession. Law is a service profession. And we can get lost in the weeds of, this ESI, fight, or this request for admission, and yada, yada, yada. We can get just stuck in that. But at the end of the day, what are we doing? This is a human profession providing services to humans, or the humans who own this company. And all those folks have ends and have value, and have children and wants and dreams. And it's important to center that, I think. And I think that helps, again, if we're skewing away from technology, but I also think that helps with wellness in the profession, that that you're engaged in a human profession that is helping. We're not building bridges, but we're helping to resolve conflict.
Yeah.
We're helping to reorder your life. We're helping to make sure this community has growing jobs and opportunities so that it's thriving, right? That's what the lawyer does when he or she is at work. And I think when we reframe that, and I think that's exciting. And again, I'm going to stick with rule of law as a heck of an inheritance that we have. And I think that it's each and every one of us has an obligation and a moral duty as lawyers to stand up for it and foster it and promote it and hold it dear. Because when we look around the world and we see places that rule of law has not been fostered and held dear, that's hard to recover from. So we want to make sure that we are safeguarding that inheritance. Not that it's perfect, not that we don't have work to do. Yes, 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 yes. But gosh, it's a blessing what we have. So we have a duty to lean into that.
Dean Mulligan, that's a fantastic answer, and I think a fantastic answer to end the episode on, to go back to that 30,000-foot view and culturally look at what is it that we really do as attorneys, and keep that in perspective and not get lost in the weeds of all the little details, AI and this practice and that practice. So thank you very much. And it's been a fascinating conversation. There's been so much. We could go on for another 2 hours with just some of the follow-up questions I'd love to ask. So we really appreciate the time that you spent with us today. And on behalf of Daniel and all of the NeLI Pod listeners, thank you very much for what you shared. It's been fantastic.
Well, it was absolutely a joy, Brandon and Daniel. Love it so much. I look forward to our next NeLI conference here at UMKC. And if your listeners have not been to a NeLI conference, gosh, please do come. You'll have a great time in Kansas City. We have food other than barbecue as well, but the barbecue's great. I'd love to meet you all. So thank you all for this opportunity. It was a pleasure.
No, that's fantastic. And I appreciate the endorsement as well for NeLI, and those that are interested in coming out to Kansas City, go to eDiscoveryleadership.org and you can learn more about that. Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed our discussion and want to learn more, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite streaming platform. We're here to help you stay on top of the latest trends and developments in eDiscovery.
We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about today's topic. Reach out to us via our social media channels or email us directly. Your feedback makes our program stronger and more attuned to the topics you care about in the world of legal technology.
Remember, all the resources and insights shared today are aimed at enhancing your practice and understanding of eDiscovery.
Join us next time on NeLI Pod as we continue to bring you expert knowledge and lively discussions. Until then, keep innovating, keep discovering, and keep pushing the boundaries of legal technology. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.